The Powered Paragliding Show, brought to you in conjunction with Paramotor Magazine, with your hosts, Michael Purdy, Jeff Going, and Paul Anthem.
Let's fly away!
Welcome to the Powered Paragliding Show. I'm Michael Purdy, here with Jeff Going and Paul Anthem. And Paul's got some thoughts on big motors and little motors, putters versus drivers, as he likes to say.
Hey, guys. How's everyone doing?
Outstanding.
Great. Interesting topic you have.
Yeah, well, I actually hear a lot about that on the American sites and at fly-ins, on the UK sites. There's been a lot of debate recently, sometimes from manufacturers, but other times from people who have, well, I've got a big motor and I wouldn't do anything without it, and, well, I've got a small motor and it does just fine for everything I want to do.
It's like weight versus thrust.
Well, my Chevy's better than your Ford sometimes, but that's just brand name. So I wanted to call it putter versus driver, but the interesting thing about that is you would think that the small motor would be your putter and the larger motor would be your driver. But I think that would be just the opposite. And here's why. Well, Jeff, you have both a large motor and a small motor.
I've got it two ways. I've got a small motor with a large prop, and it's very lightweight with decent thrust. And I've got a larger motor with a big prop, and it has a lot of thrust. And then I have a large motor with a tiny prop, and it has ridiculously minuscule thrust. But it makes a lot of noise.
Okay, so if I were to go, say, and of course, large motor versus big motor also begs the question, well, what are you using it for? Not necessarily how heavy you are. But anyway, so if you were going to go on a cross-country, in other words, a driver, a long-distance drive, cross-country, would you want a big motor or the small motor? I myself would want the small motor, believe it or not, if it had lower vibration and it was smoother, because long cross-country, you're not going to be playing around, going up and down through the trees. You don't need a lot of instant power.
Might get better gas mileage as well.
And it might get better gas mileage, so you can go further. Less vibration, if you're going to be sitting there for 2 or 3 hours, you're going to want something fairly smooth and quiet. So it turns out, in the terminology I'm thinking of at least, I think that the putter is actually the big motor, and the driver is the small motor. Because if you're putting around or playing around, zooming in and out of the trees and valleys, well, for that, I want a big motor.
Yeah.
I need a big motor. What do you guys think?
That makes sense.
One thing is you have to define big motor, small motor. I mean, I presume, of course, you're talking about displacement. My top 80 is 80 cc's, and my Black Devil is 172 cc's. Strangely enough, my least powerful machine, the direct drive, is 210 cc's with a Solo 210.
But that's just because of the drive and the prop.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you have an old inefficient engine on without a redrive, so that's almost not fair to bring to the subject.
True. That's true. Any modern engine uses a redrive and a big prop, so I agree with you. I think you're absolutely right. With a small motor, it requires more planning, and you can't do some of the same things. I cannot go into as steep of a bank as I'd like with the mini plane, whereas I can go into a steeper bank with the Black Devil. In fact, I just did a climb test with the Black Devil day before yesterday, or actually that was last night, wasn't it? And I was making 500 foot a minute climb rate, whereas on the mini plane I do about 250 to 300. Still very respectable.
Big difference, though.
And the other thing is that the lightweight motors, they're so much easier for people to launch.
And start, and less vibration, less fuel. It depends if you can get away with it. Jeff's I don't want to say a scrawny little guy, but
that's okay. I'm a scrawny little guy.
Jeff's not a big guy, and so you can fly almost anything. It's you get somebody that's a couple 100 pounds or 220 or 30 pounds. They got to have a big wing before they can fly some of these smaller engines, right?
Well, and even with a big wing, it's going to be more of a struggle. Like climb rate is a function of the excess power, and if you're heavy, you're going to need a bigger motor. So that is a good point.
Taking all up weight considerations aside, let's just say we had motors, a large enough motor for a bigger person and a small enough motors for a smaller person. I guess the real issue is, well, like you said, power to weight ratio, Jeff.
Yeah.
If you were to, in more theoretical terms, discuss it. In other words, do you really need a lot of power, or do you need just enough to get you up in the air with a kind of decent climb?
So many variables. I mean, how much do you weigh? How high are you? Where are you flying? What's the altitude? There's so many options. But the other thing I think it's important to mention for new people getting into the sport is this is one sport where it's not always bigger is better. If you want to buy a motorcycle, bigger might be better. But in our sport, there's a trade-off, and if you are a lighter guy, and depending on again where you're flying, it can be a big advantage, to fly a smaller motor, a better experience.
How many people have we seen struggle with big motors? I think that for learning, a pilot almost should learn on a small motor so he has less chance to fall.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. I know about 3 people personally that were ready to give up powered paragliding until they got a small motor. And then they said, oh, this is great. I can launch now and feel good about it. It's not a struggle.
Yeah. I just talked to a 60-year-old, I think, very capable man, but he was in the same boat. He was not liking it because he had a heavier motor. It had a Simonini. It's a good machine. It's a great machine. But when he put on the top 80 machine, it's like, okay, you know what? I'm going to keep foot launching now. It's not for everybody.
We're all headed for motors. We're all headed for wheels.
Yeah, well, eventually. But, hey, we're still a ways from it, I think.
Hopefully so.
I just flew wheels today, but that was on a hang glider trike, so.
Yeah. Anyway, but it is an interesting subject, and there's so many things that come into play. It's hard to have, just a general conversation about it, really.
Well, and there is an advantage to a more powerful motor for sure, in that you have more power to get you moving once you got the wing up. So besides the other advantages that you've mentioned, Paul, there is the fact that makes part of the launch easier.
Mm-hmm.
So
right. Less time you have to try.
If they're not too big. I mean, we've all seen guys. Remember, Eric Chase comes to my mind at flying a few years ago. That guy was like the Energizer Bunny running back and forth across the horizon for like a quarter mile at a time, never getting off the ground.
Ugh, I remember that. Yeah. Yeah, you always have to have enough power to get you airborne safely. I mean, that's for sure. But the other parts are a trade-off.
Yeah. All things being equal, lighter's better.
Mm-hmm.
Parting thoughts on this one?
Talk to your instructor. Oh, one more comment on it is that, in a way, it takes more skill to fly a lower power motor because you have to do more planning. Yeah. You've got the trees out there. Well, you can't just climb over them. You have to plan it. So there is that element of it that you have to think about, too.
All right. Anything else on that, Paul?
No, that's it. It's one big trade-off, and there's no right or wrong answer.
Bingo.
Exactly. Well put. All right, you're listening to the Powered Paragliding Show with Michael Purdy, Jeff Going, and Paul Anthony.
Closing time. Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end.